If you're just getting started in wine and you want to know how to get better tasting notes, this is the video for you. My name is Marie Cheslik. I'm an award-winning wine educator, business owner, sommelier, and I'm here to make wine accessible for everyone. I have an online wine platform called the Slik School, and every week I meet up with my students and have a little Q&A to talk about what they're interested in that week. I had Joanna and Sam join me this week, and they really love my 60-second blind tasting videos. I'll link one of them here. But in essence, I take something that in the professional world is sort of the peak of being able to blind taste a wine, which is being able to taste a wine without knowing what it is and say what it is. You usually get 5 minutes for something like this, but I do it in 60 seconds. And with that comes panic and some really ridiculous tasting notes. Things like old pirate ship, mushy peas, barbecue possum. And Joe asked me, how do you get those tasting notes? Are they real? And they are real. And it did take me a while to get there. So aside from this being like a funny or cool party trick, why would you want to get these really specific tasting notes in a wine? From a professional level, if you are taking the Court of Master Sommelier exam, the WSET, or the Master of Wine program, there is a blind tasting portion to these. And in my experience, the more specific you can get with tasting notes and associate that tasting note with a region, it makes the tasting a lot easier. If you start to associate Sauvignon Blanc with mushy peas or grapefruit rinds, then you're more likely to get it right in a tasting. If you're not a professional and you're just a hobbyist who wants to get into this, for me, I think it just helps you enjoy wine a bit more. It really does deepen the value of the wine, and it helps you admire or appreciate the sort of complexity that goes into certain wines. So we're going to teach you how to taste wine good, how to get good tastings, and those are the few reasons why. So detecting smells. Detecting smells in a wine is hard. If you've ever been to a wine tasting and they ask you what you smell in a wine, and in that moment you forget everything you've ever smelled in your entire life, that is normal. That was also me. I think this is something that really does take time and repetition, and I relate it to like going to the gym. Like, you go to the gym and you suck. All you can do are the 2-pound or the 5-pound weights. You're not really sure how to move your body. You feel awkward in the space. But as you do it over and over again, you gain a bit more confidence and reassurance. Smelling is the same way. Detecting smells and identifying smells is actually quite personal. And our brain actually explains why. It's kind of cool. So to better understand a sense of smell, I think we need to understand our brains. So let me draw you a picture. Here is brain. Here is... Nice. You know, in essence, this is a brain. So our brain is broken up into a few sections, and each section of your brain has a certain job. So let's also imagine... Oh yeah, there we go. There's our guy. I don't like the eye. We're not going to do the eye on him. So your sense of smell is called your olfactory system. And your olfactory system kind of lives right there, deep in the brain. Like if you were to pet your brain like a dog, you wouldn't be able to touch it. It's really in there. It touches a very important part of the brain called the limbic system. And it kind of looks like that. So here's your limbic system, which is actually a few parts of the brain, and there's the olfactory. They are directly next to each other. And there is a physiological significance to this. In short, your limbic system does two very important things. It regulates emotions and stores memories. Now you can probably see where I'm going with this. Your sense of smell is directly touching, sharing blood flow, sharing neural pathways with your limbic system. So they're so intertwined, it's not even funny. The kind of classic example of a tasting note that invokes a memory is grandma's apple pie. I think people have a very distinct flavor of that in their head, or whatever your grandma or your mom or whomever used to cook for you when you were a kid, you probably have a very specific food memory with that. A weirder example would be when I was a kid, the chore for me in the house was to take out the garbage. So every time I open a fresh plastic garbage bag, I get this idea of like growing up in the house, my childhood home. It invokes a very strong nostalgia factor for me. The fact that physiologically smells, memories, and emotions are so tied together will help us understand how to have better tasting notes later. But let me show you the rest. Okay, I kind of view tasting sort of like an upside down triangle. I guess I'll go over here. Since wine flavors are a bit personal and related to emotions sometimes, or just happenstance of where you grew up, I find that it's better to start with big, broad strokes. So when I teach about wine, I teach how to taste. This is usually the first thing I teach. And I go so broad. I go so big. The first thing I ask someone is, do you smell fruit or not fruit? These upper spectrums, we can all generally sort of agree on. We can all agree if something smells fruity or not fruity. As we get down here, it gets more personal, but we'll get there. You could also do earthy, maybe even something spiced. So if you're smelling a wine and go, yes, I do get spices. Maybe I can't nail down what kind of spices, but that's okay. I am getting this earthiness. Maybe it kind of smells like dirt in some way. This is good. This is step one. Very important. So next step is honing in on these big categories a bit more. What kind of fruit or spice am I smelling? This is where you might get a little more specific. So if we said fruit, maybe you're thinking, okay, I guess it smells like a cherry or strawberry. Maybe it's going to be more fun for me to draw them. Oh well. Am I smelling a cherry or a strawberry? That would be a specific fruit. That's the next step. That's how we get into more specific tasting notes. And then for the spice category, let's think about, well, what kind of spices are there? There's things like cinnamon. That's a cinnamon stick, by the way. Or cloves, right? They kind of look like that. Thinking about a specific kind of broad category is the next step. So how do we get there? How in my brain do I get from, okay, it smells like fruit to it smells like cherries? For me, there's been two things that have been very helpful, which is cooking and looking in your spice cabinet. Let me give you an example. And so if you cook at home, this is probably the easiest way to get to this next step, because I think about like a fajita mix, right? It's onions and peppers and meat. Like, it's a pretty straightforward recipe, but can you really smell the difference between an onion and a pepper? Like, is there a pepper? Does the pepper have a certain smell? Like, if you were to close your eyes and you were to smell each one, I'll go, that's absolutely an onion and that's a pepper. Ask yourself why. Does the pepper have a little more of this earthy thing going on? Does the onion have this pungent sweet thing going on? Sitting there and really thinking about what is the difference between these two things, even fruits, being like, can I really close my eyes and smell the difference between a cherry and a strawberry? That would be the next step and kind of next exercise for you. And even take a bite of each, right? Be more thoughtful about the things that you consume and what they smell and what they really taste like. So cooking and then looking in your spice cabinet. This is very helpful for spices. I just put pantry, but you think about going to the spice cabinet and doing the same thing. Pick out cloves and pick out cinnamon. Close your eyes and think, do I really smell the difference? Like, cloves have this more floral, abrasive flavor. I think they're much stronger. Cinnamon has this sort of like sweet, earthy, dirty type thing that goes with it. The next step I'm calling the condition. For the condition, you're either breaking it down into the type or what is happening to it. For type, let's use the cherry example again. There are tart cherries that come from Michigan. They're really small and kind of like neon red looking. They taste way different than the Rainier cherries that you might get from Washington. Understanding the differences between, okay, do I really know like what a maraschino cherry tastes like versus a tart cherry? What are the subtle differences? Is one more acidic? Is one fruitier? Is one not as sweet? That would be the next step. So we've gotten from fruit to cherries to what kind of cherries. Or in that same example, we have a fruit, we have cherries, but what's happening to the cherry? If you imagine a ripe cherry off the tree, juicy, sweet, fresh, snappy, yum. How is that different than a cherry jam, which is usually more stewed or cooked, or there's something deeper going on with it? Yeah, sometimes they add sugar and spices to jam, but you just imagine that some wines really taste jammier, and some wines are like, yeah, this tastes like fruit, but like a fresh piece of fruit. Another example would be like going down the spiced road. So I smell a spice, okay, and I think it's cinnamon. You're like, okay, like, there are different kinds of cinnamon you can buy. There's ground cinnamon and there's sticks of cinnamon. That is the condition. That is what is happening to the cinnamon. What did we do to the cinnamon? What is happening to it? And let's do another one just to drive it home. So earthy, right? I smell something earthy. And to me, it smells like dirt. Like, it just smells like I'm walking on a dirt trail, maybe. So that's the kind of earthy. So that's the next step. And then the condition of the earth. Okay, what is happening to this earth? Okay, maybe I smell dirt, but maybe it's like wet. Like mud is gonna smell different than dry dirt versus potting soil you buy at a bag at Menards. They all have a very different essence to them. But how do we get from the second step to the conditional third step? This is repetition and thoughtfully tasting. There's just so much stuff out there that could be viewed as the same, but are actually so different. And this is kind of where we get into different grape varietal categories. Wine, there's white wine, and people might just see white wine as white wine, and that's fine and good. But white wine is made out of different types of grapes. It's all very conditional. So a Sauvignon Blanc is going to taste different than a Chardonnay. It's going to taste different than a Pinot Grigio, and so on. And finally, here's the secret. This is the secret. This is what the 60-second blind tastings are all about. There's a fourth tier. And sometimes it's the easiest thing, which I think is so interesting. It actually almost comes back to the first. Okay, we'll fix that later. It might actually be one of the first things you think about, which I think is the most interesting part about this. And it relates it back to the brain thing. Getting the wackiest tasting note might be the first thing you think of. Because if we go back to our brain and how they're so tightly close together, like the grandma's apple pie example, sometimes it's the first thing you think of. And it's this great beginner's mind thing. There is this like innate understanding of like smells being tied to something. And this is what I channel when I get these kind of ridiculous tasting notes. And sometimes you get there by luck and you almost have to reverse engineer how we got there. Grandma's apple pie is actually a very specific tasting note because you think of what goes into an apple pie, a buttery crust, apples certainly, and thinking about this condition. Okay, or the type, like what kind of apples are they? A pie made out of Granny Smith apples is going to taste pretty different than like a Golden Delicious or a Red Delicious apple pie. There's probably some spice in there and it's probably cinnamon. Maybe it's cloves, maybe it's a little bit of nutmeg. People start at this highest level because it's associated with the memory and they don't know why. But this is why. This is why. It's in there somewhere. We just need to know how to find it. And to get to all these steps, we can go back here again, which I think is cool. Not only is it related just to memories, but it's also the memories are very conditional of where you grew up. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So all my memories are kind of associated with these like white Americana things like dairy products, things like American snacks. So if I grew up like in Vietnam, I might not go to fruit or earth or like a grandma's apple pie right away. I would probably go to more of like an herbaceous kind of category, being like, what kind of fresh herbs am I using? And even like in the fruit category, I use like cherries, but in Vietnam, if I grew up in Vietnam, I'd be having more of a tropical fruit like a lychee or a rambutan, maybe association with things. So this is the point where it's the most natural, but you also need to lean into that. There is nothing wrong with leaning into that. I think that's what makes wine really fun. And it's okay if not everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. You're doing it for you. You're not doing it for someone else. And you might think, okay, Marie, what about this barbecued possum situation or old pirate ship? There's no way you know what that smells like. And okay, that is true. But by using this exercise and just having the creative freedom to have a little bit of fun with it, something like barbecued possum, this will kind of bring all the ideas together. I think of a barbecue flavor like Lay's potato chips. Like it is a very particular sweet spice sort of thing. And a possum. No, have I ever smelled a possum in person, but I imagine them to be like kind of musky and dirty. I mean, like they're outside, they like roll around in garbage. So it's this sort of like stanky, musky thing, but I'm also getting barbecue chips. So in my brain, it's like, sometimes it's just the idea of what I think something smells like, or just trying to culminate that together. But for me, that makes it fun. Old pirate ship, it's like, okay, maybe there is this wooden component to it, but it's like rotting. But it might also be as old as time, and it also might be in the ocean because I'm getting like this salty sailing thing. So you kind of just saw how my brain worked, where maybe it's a little overactive, but I think leaning into these crazy tasting notes is fun, and a really creative way just to have fun with wine. And what helps me kind of get to this, I'm going to call it the point of enlightenment. Comment down below if you have a better name for this peak example of tasting note. There was a book I read recently that said that people associate commercial products with identifying smells as well. I mean, that kind of makes sense. We live in a capitalistic society. We are consumers. So people are much likely to identify a smell based on Pine Sol or a Pop-Tart. It's kind of crazy, but I have used those and I lean into that with the crazy tasting notes because people get them. I also read a good amount of books because authors have the job of using only words to elicit a feeling. Sometimes when I read a book and I find a good line, oh, this is funny. This is like a really specific food example, but a spoon fell from a bowl of tabbouleh and spun into the dirt. There's a lot going on there. So I think of a spoon. Spoons are metallic, and if you ever just put a metallic spoon in your mouth, it does have a taste to it and kind of a smell to it. Tabbouleh, there's so much, it doesn't say what kind of tabbouleh, but there's so many things that go into it, like fresh parsley or sumac or lemon. So I imagine like the spoon, the metallic spoon and the tabbouleh, but also it fell on the ground. There's also a dirt aspect to it. Like, that's crazy. There is a lot going on here that you can use for specific tasting notes. So this is like books, products, and tying it back to the emotions and feelings. I hope this gives you the tools and the confidence to really lean into kind of wacky tasting notes. It makes wine way more fun. If you like this video, please let me know in the comments. If you like this sort of whiteboard action, I'm trying something new. So let me know if you like this format, a little more educational and straightforward. But if you haven't yet, please like, subscribe, follow Slik Wines on all platforms. If you're interested in asking me questions like this and I'm answering them in person, along with an online wine course I have, please check out Slik School on the bottom. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.